With a ceasefire deal between the U.S. and Iran set to be signed and take effect on Friday, European leaders are praising in unison what they call a diplomatic breakthrough. Here's German Chancellor Friedrich Merz.
This is the first time since President Trump took office that we've issued a joint declaration at a G7 summit and found common language on the major foreign and security policy issues of our time. I consider that a real success. In fact, our statement contains a very clear message on this matter. Support for Ukraine from this group is stronger than it has been for a long time. All G7 partners will step up their military and financial contributions to Ukraine. And the message to Russia is just as clear. All G7 partners will increase the pressure on Moscow, including through sanctions. This also sets a new tone in terms of transatlantic unity and resolve. It may take us a decisive step forward towards peace negotiations.
Well, German Chancellor Merz joined the other G7 leaders in calling the deal an opportunity for the Middle East. A return to peace could see oil flowing freely again from the Gulf, releasing considerable pressure that has slowed the global economy. The agreement hasn't been signed yet, but a leaked draft offers the clearest picture so far of what both sides are prepared to accept. U.S. officials have also read a draft to journalists. There are 14 points that we know of, including an immediate ceasefire and an end to hostilities, 60 days to negotiate a final agreement, and the U.S. is to ease sanctions and release frozen assets. Iran pledges never to build nuclear weapons, and the deal reportedly includes the possibility of a $300 billion economic development package for Iran. Now, important for global commerce, the agreement calls for the Strait of Hormuz to be reopened to shipping, and it ends the U.S. blockade of Iranian ports. Among those welcoming the framework is NATO Chief Mark Rutte. He says it could improve security well beyond the Middle East.
I really want to welcome the deal made by President Trump with Iran. The U.S. action to prevent the threat of a nuclear-armed Iran and degrade its ballistic missile capability improves security for us all. And the deal President Trump struck has created an opportunity to ensure Iran never obtains a nuclear weapon. The restoration of free passage through the Strait of Hormuz will be a massive step forward. And I know that many allies, through the initiative led by France and the United Kingdom, are ready to support.
And joining me now is Maleki, a senior fellow with the Iran program at the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies in Washington, D.C. He played a leading role in creating and coordinating U.S. sanctions programs against the Iranian regime and its proxies. Miad, it's good to have you on the program. If we just look at this leaked draft agreement, what has been reported, is there anything in it, anything that changes the way things were before the war began?
Thanks for having me on. Well, I mean, really, we're still trying to understand the details in the text because, you know, the wording is definitely gives Iran, the Iranian regime, some good talking points domestically, but really the details here are important. I think just going over a few items to respond to your question, Iran saying they will never obtain or seek a nuclear weapon. They've been always saying that they don't want a nuclear bomb. They're not after a nuclear weapon. They've been caught lying in developing a program. I think the verifications are very important. I don't think this MOU, this Memorandum of Understanding, doesn't really address that, doesn't get to those details. The state of Iran's enrichment, it's not addressing in uranium enrichment, it's not addressing here, but then Iran is not really spinning any centrifuges right now. So that's different. Before war, before the conflict, before the 12-day conflict last year, Iran had a nuclear program and uranium enrichment program that was running, that was operating, that doesn't exist anymore. Iran's missiles and drone program just significantly degraded. probably something that took them about 15 to 20 years to develop, 70-80% of it is gone. So there definitely is significant degradation to their military, political, and economic capabilities or state of their economy before war. They're operating in a completely different environment economically. I think the text of this deal that I'm looking at right now really underappreciates the leverage that the U.S. and the West has with Iran right now.
Okay, well, let me ask you about what is and perhaps is not in this deal. I mean, obviously, as you said, Iran says that it will never try to acquire or make a nuclear weapon, but there's not a lot there about the enrichment process. Does this strike you as being somewhat ambiguous? I mean, does it raise any red flags for you?
Well, I mean, the red flags here that I'm seeing is obviously, if I was in the government, I witnessed these type of talks and negotiations over Iran's nuclear program. It's not something you can really address in a matter of weeks or months. It takes time to sort out the details and come to some kind of an agreement with this regime on the nuclear enrichment front. So I think that's the reason you just don't see a whole lot of descriptions here, because that needs to go through a very robust process to be negotiated over. But here's one thing that I know very clearly here is that the President Trump's messaging was, we're going to remove the highly enriched uranium from Iran. Now, based on this text, it seems like U.S. government has agreed to potentially downblend and let Iranian do that inside Iran and keep the lower grade enriched uranium. On the enrichment, President Trump said no enrichment, no uranium enrichment. That doesn't seem to be something that they managed to get from Iranians at this point. And I would argue that now was the time to get Iranians to agree to something like that. We didn't get it. We're not going to get it at the end of the 60-day. We're not going to get it anytime soon, given the sanctions relief that they're going to be getting as we go through this 60-day or longer process.
But so that is a win then for the regime in Tehran.
Well, I mean, it's hard to call it a win. They've lost layers and layers of tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 political figures. And they've lost their nuclear program that they spent, hundreds of billions of dollars to develop. They've lost, as I said, their missiles and drone program. And with all that loss, they still had to come to Islamabad to cut a deal, to get a deal. So I don't think they can call it a win. They're going to call it a win, but people in Iran, they know, they're walking the streets. They see the effect of war. They see how weak the regime is right now. But at the same time, the regime does have a very small core supporters in Iran. They radicalized 5-10% of the population that supports this regime. They're going to view this as, hey, we went through the war, yet we managed to get sanctions relief. We managed to get U.S. to lift the sanctions and give us access to our frozen assets.
What we have seen so far appears to offer Iran sanctions relief. There's access to frozen assets and a path back into the global economy. I mean, if you look at the text as a whole, who gets the better deal here?
Well, I mean, it's difficult to say who's getting a better deal. I think U.S. government, U.S. administration could have gotten a much better deal than this. But at the same time, there was a desire to open up the Strait of Hormuz. We have midterm elections coming here in the U.S. There's a political clock that folks are looking at very closely. But as far as sanctions relief, there's a couple paragraphs talking about issues of sanctions on Iran's access to its frozen funds. These are restricted funds that are sitting in Qatar, in Oman, in Iraq. Historically, Iranian regime had access to these funds to use them for humanitarian purchases, for agricultural commodities. To me, it sounds like that's what they're going to get here. It's not really the release of funds. Now, the regime would say these funds are being released because they want to make it sound like a win. But I'm hoping, and I'm almost sure that this is going to be just going back to the purchase of humanitarian goods, agricultural commodities. And the text that I saw says that they will be given access to this after the issue of enriched uranium is addressed. And then there's also what's really concerning to me in this text is that the one sentence that says no new sanctions. You know, the way that sanctions work is that you enforce sanctions and then the market would comply with sanctions. When you're not enforcing sanctions, really takes away the effect of sanctions. So I think that's a very important part of this memorandum of understanding. If we're going through a phase that sanctions are not being enforced, that'll give Iran time and the ability to bypass sanctions and get its hand on revenue from oil, petrochemicals, metals, and other profitable industries that Iran has.
Nihat, I want to point out something before we run out of time. I've heard you say several times the U.S. could have gotten this and that, but they didn't. If we take everything as a whole, it sounds like you're saying that the U.S. really dropped the ball when it comes to negotiating and using leverage that perhaps it would have had and letting this be a lost opportunity. I mean, is that what you're saying? I mean, the U.S. comes out of this as the worse or the weaker negotiator.
I would argue that you could have, if President Trump wanted to open up the Strait of Hormuz, we could have lifted the blockade and the Iranian regime would have been forced to open the Strait of Hormuz. And the reason for that is because, you know, their own economy relies on the flow of commerce through the Strait of Hormuz. They need to reestablish their relationship with their Gulf partners, with Emiratis, where they have billions of dollars of assets in financial flow that goes through UAE. They need to reestablish a relationship with the Chinese, with the Indians and Pakistanis. They had to open the Strait of Hormuz if we didn't have a blockade in place. So that's why I really think that we could have agreed to a deal that didn't really give them any kind of sanctions relief until they had agreed to some expectations as far as no enrichment or agreeing to robust verifications as far as inspections, some agreement on the missile and drone program, how that could be contained. So I think that's what I mean. There were opportunities to get a better deal here with that.
Yeah, and we want to remind our viewers, we're still dealing with incomplete information, but you did an excellent job in analyzing, what we do know and what we think we may know in about 48 hours from now. Maleki from the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies, we appreciate your time and your insights. Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Well, for more, I want to pull in now Alan Eyre. He spent 4 decades in the U.S. Foreign Service. He was a key member of the U.S. nuclear negotiating team for the 2015 JCPOA nuclear agreement with Iran. He is now a fellow at the Middle East Institute. Mr. Eyre, it's good to have you on the program. Good to see you again. Looking at this agreement, or what we know of the agreement, is there anything in it that changes the way things were before the war started?
Yeah, no, we will never get back to the pre-war situation, or at least not for the foreseeable future. The Middle East region right now is far less stable. The economy will still suffer for months, if not years, from the closure of the strait. But the good news is we've stopped fighting. There's a ceasefire, and we hope it holds.
Based on what has been reported so far, this agreement says that Iran will never produce nuclear weapons, but it says very little about enrichment itself. Why do you think we have this ambiguity?
Well, Iran has always said it will never produce nuclear weapons. It's a member of the NPT, the Non-Proliferation Treaty, which requires them to say that. When we did the JCPOA in 2015, they also said that. What Iran says it will and will not do is irrelevant. What's important is the level of verification they accept, so we can be confident about what they are and are not doing. And in terms of this deal versus the 2015 deal, I'll be able to compare a Trump nuclear deal with the JCPOA if and when President Trump and his colleagues can negotiate one. We're just at the start of that process.
Are you expecting, Mr. Eyre, that in 60 days that we'll be able to talk again about a substantive deal that would include inspectors, for example?
No. Again, it took the Obama administration, from start to finish, 5 years to negotiate a nuclear deal with Iran that resulted in a comprehensive 160-page document. 2 years of that were intense negotiations. So we're not going to get an agreement in 60 days, at least any agreement that's worth its salt. We might get the beginnings of one in 120 days if they extend, but it's going to take serious and sustained negotiations by technical experts to get any sort of deal. And I have serious doubts as to whether this current administration, U.S. administration, is willing and able to engage in that type of negotiation.
Well, the issue of Iran's enriched uranium, it sounds like you think that it's going to be the main battleground during the next 60 days. Am I reading you correctly?
No, Brent, actually, that's relatively secondary. Again, President Trump, who changes his positions regularly, has said that he's willing to, for the time being, to have it stay underground. The 440 kilograms of highly enriched uranium are, in fact, very important. And removing that or downblending that would make Iran weaponizing very hard. But the key to any deal with Iran on its nuclear issue that's worth its, its name is verification by the IAEA. The IAEA hasn't been there since June of 2025. So we're blind except for what our intelligence and allied intelligence can tell us. So again, verification is the essence. It's the spinal cord of any nuclear deal. That's what we have to reconstitute.
We spoke a couple of weeks ago, and I remember I asked you about the dearth of nuclear engineers, nuclear experts in the United States, particularly in the wake of the cutbacks that we saw in the last year. How confident are you that the United States can bring top experts to the negotiating table to facilitate the creation of some type of nuclear inspection regimen?
Well, we don't need our own people to inspect. We've got that, the IAEA. But you're right. We need technical expertise. Now, the U.S. still has tremendous technical expertise in terms of sanctions, in terms of nuclear energy. So we have the right people. The problem is the intersection set of qualified technical experts and the people that President Trump trusts as politically loyal, who should be engaged in this negotiation. I don't think there's an intersection set there. If the same 4 or 5 people, Jared Kushner, Steve Witkoff, do this without technical expertise involved, nothing's going to happen.
Beyond the nuclear issue, the draft, or at least what we have seen of it, appears to offer Iran sanctions relief, access to frozen assets, and a path back into the global economy. I mean, if you look at it, especially someone from outside looking at it, it would seem that Iran is getting the better end of the deal here. What do you think?
Well, again, there's money and there's money. What Iran will get right off the bat is the ability to export its oil and related products by waivers. That's important. And then the U.S. says they'll unblock money. That's a little less sure, but that's possible. But when we get to talk of $300 billion development, that's vaporware. That is highly unlikely to happen because the things that Iran will have to do to get that, Iran isn't willing to do. Iran does not want to be reconstituted into a Western-led economy where the U.S. calls the shots, right? So what we think Iran should want, they don't want. Yes, they want investment, but I seriously doubt they're willing to make the political concessions that the U.S. wants. And in addition to that, if you're an investor, you can't be forced into investing in Iran. And unless you've got an incredibly high tolerance for risk, any investor, regardless of where they are, is going to think twice about investing in Iran, at least for the rest of the Trump administration.
Mr. Eyre, we certainly do appreciate your time and your valuable insights to this. As we can see, there are lots of loose ends that have to be addressed between the U.S. and Iran. Thank you.
Thank you, Brent. Take care.